For years, the female body has been the debated space on which has been forced many cultural expectations, and the adolescent girl's body is no exception. In literature for young adults, the overall message seems to be that the emerging sexuality of the young woman is both powerful yet dangerous, and a terrain that, if explored, can have terrible consequences. In my lecture, I will be drawing upon the theories of Michel Foucault and illustrating how YA authors, as institutionalized voices, create female characters whose bodies are both docile yet dangerous. I will explore this problematic treatment of female sexuality in YA literature, looking specifically at Judy Blume's Forever and E.K. Johnston's Exit Pursued by a Bear, in the aim to show that it is both the pleasures and dangers of sexuality that must be discussed for young readers to gain a well-rounded view of what it means to come of age as a young woman. In The History of Sexuality, Foucault notes that issues of sexuality are linked in the West to scientific or religious discourses. Within scientific discourses, sexuality can be conceptualized in terms of what is normal or abnormal. Foucault also cites the pastoral or pastorate as significant in this normal versus abnormal way of framing discourses, but in a way that attaches a sense of morality to sexual issues. Sexuality became framed within the context of the confessional, thus attaching a sense of sinfulness or wickedness to not only issues surrounding sexuality and gender, but also to certain sexual acts. Hence, it is the institutional power from which comes discourses about this subject that attempt to gain control over sexuality through this notion of framing. In Discipline and Punish, Foucault discusses the ways in which the body is disciplined into action through institutional powers, and it's in this way, Foucault writes, that the body becomes both docile and dangerous. He provides the example of the soldier as the prime example of this. So the soldier's body is likened to a precise machine whose posture is gradually corrected. A calculated constraint runs slowly through each part of the body, mastering it, making it pliable, ready at all times, turning silently into the automatism of habit. In short, one has got rid of the peasant and given him the air of a soldier. Yet the soldier in this example is also dangerous because he possesses capabilities of destruction. A docile body, Foucault writes, is one that can be subjected, used, transformed, and improved. Such a discussion illuminates the way institutions hold power over individuals' experiences of embodiment. It is through the perpetuations of certain discourses that the female body comes to be constructed. As Judith Butler writes, the process of becoming a woman is an ongoing discursive practice, which is open to intervention and resignification. The structures in society aim to discipline the female body into an acceptable construct, which we can see by the way girls are told to look, speak, act, and respond to their own sexuality. Day also theorises that women are their bodies in ways that males are not, and this assumption of women's inherent or natural sense of embodiment then suggests a more general possibility that women's bodies are more vulnerable to the process of creating docile bodies. That is, the female body may be more likely to be subject to transformation or perceived improvement within a system of control. The discourses surrounding female sexuality and the adolescent girl's body indicate the frames institutions have used in order to regulate female sexuality. In Daring to Desire, Culture and the Bodies of Adolescent Girls, Tolman discusses her research into the ways in which adolescent female sexuality is discussed and researched. She discovered that issues surrounding adolescent female sexuality were spoken significantly in terms of violence, victimization, and individual morality. The possibility of desire as an aspect of their sexuality was named only on occasion, and only by the girls themselves. So the notion of teenage girls as people who could experience sexual desire themselves was discussed, as Foucault would have predicted, within the frames of both science and morality. Frequently, the studies Tolman located were to do with discussions about things such as the dangers of AIDS, teen pregnancy, and which forms of contraception should be used. Instead of the focus being on the female desire, the changes girls experience in puberty are linked to the male gaze. As Tolman writes, as the unmistakable contours of a female body emerge, a girl's body becomes defined in cultural terms as an object of men's fantasies and desires. The relationship between internal and external, the subjective experience of desire and the objective experience of finding oneself objectified, is essentially confusing and problematic for girls. And not only is it confusing for the adolescent who is in a critical stage of forming her identity, it unleashes what Tolman calls moral panic over things such as preventing STIs and teen pregnancy, and often infuses these discourses around female sexuality with shame. So if we negate this notion of girls' experience of sexual desire, the girl becomes the object of the male gaze and she becomes more easily objectified. In line with Foucault's theories regarding institutional power over the body, she becomes docile. And if the cultural assumption that Tolman's research shows stands that girls don't experience sexual desire, then the female body becomes a dangerous thing rather than something that can have power and agency. It's something the body is something then outside the female's control and something that can lure the male gaze and cause trouble for her. Literature for young adults is a significant site in which these cultural assumptions can be reflected or contested. In Disturbing the Universe, Roberta Silinger-Trites asserts that YA fiction is about power and addresses notions of how power can operate within and upon the adolescent protagonist. Sexual potency, she writes, is a common metaphor for empowerment in adolescent literature, so the genre is replete with sex. Sex in YA is often linked to initiation or romance. However, as Trites notes, it's usually after some form of sexual contact between the protagonist and another character that, quote, all hell breaks loose. The resulting ideology perpetuated is that sex is something more to be feared than celebrated. And institutional voices in the novel reinforce notions of sexuality being something that's dangerous. The rest of this lecture, I'm going to be talking about two novels that demonstrate this, how sexuality is shown to be something that's primarily dangerous and how the female body is shown to be both docile and dangerous. The two novels I'm going to be talking about are Judy Blume's Forever, which was published in 1975, and E.K. Johnston's more recent novel, Exit Pursued by a Bear, which was released earlier this year. And it's quite remarkable that in over 40 years, spanning from Forever to E.K. Johnston's novel, there's still this idea of the docile, dangerous female body being perpetuated. Published in 1975, Forever became the issue of much debate regarding censorship for the amount of sexual content in the narrative. The story follows Kath, a high school senior who begins a relationship with the boy Michael. The novel chronicles their relationship from start through to the consummation of their relationship, to the relationship's end, and it almost reads a bit like a teenage how-to, with discussions of things like female orgasms and whether you should have sex on your period and things like that. Towards the end of the novel, Kath, having spent the summer apart from Michael, ends up falling for the more mature tennis instructor Theo, And although she's sad to end her relationship with Michael, there is hope that her future will hold exciting, more successful relationships. Kath can be seen as an example of Foucault's docile body because she embodies cultural ideas about women being the focus of the male gaze. Kath spends a lot of time trying to please the men in her life. For example, when she's dressing for her date with Michael, she dresses in blue because she once read that boys like light blue on a girl better than any other colour. Kath is also very accepting of her father's overprotective nature because, as her friend Erica states, he's just being Freudian. The idea of the female body as docile and easy to improve or regulate is also pointed out when Kat's mother gives her an article titled, "What about the right to say no? Sexual liberation." The article appears in the novel as a construct of the author and as an institutional voice that puts forth the idea that teenage relationships don't last and the female body needs to be protected by just saying no. Tolman affirms this ideology in Western culture that this notion of girls having to be responsible and just say no, whereas guys are always ready to go. So it's up to the girl to be responsible. And as a result of this, any sense of sexual feeling experienced by the female body, as Tolman notes, can be linked to feelings of embarrassment or shame. The notion of the body being dangerous and docile is evident when Bloom describes Michael and Kath's heavy petting sessions. Although Kath says she is not ready, Michael replies, "But your body says you want to," indicating a sense of Kath's rogue body, which is more ready than she feels and is obviously tantalizing for Michael. Later in another scene, Michael says he's unable to stay away from Kath because, in his own words, "You're too dangerous." The focus on the narrative of the consequences affecting the female characters highlights ideas perpetuated by patriarchal values that female bodies are the ones that are vulnerable. So it's the girls who must be protected. And there's very little mentioned about how males are vulnerable in their sexuality. So this is indicated in the novel when Kath visits a women's clinic and her personal counsellor reiterates to her the dangers of sex and affirms Kath's vulnerability to STIs and pregnancy. Kath's mother also gives Kath an explicit warning saying, "When you give yourself both mentally and physically, you become vulnerable." Bloom also gives us more implicit warnings and reinforces the image of the vulnerable girl and the docile body. For example, when Kath's friend Sybil, her sexual ventures lead to her falling pregnant. Although Sybil wants to give birth for the experience, as she says in the novel, she later has to face the pain and trauma of giving up her child to adoptive parents. In Forever, although Bloom attempts to construct a narrative where the female body is liberated in its sexuality, it does tend to fall into that trap of didacticism. Bloom shows that when the adolescent girl is allowed to experience sexual feelings, there is that pain, there's the danger, of pain involved. And again, there's very little reference to how the male characters are vulnerable due to sexual activity. When we look at E.K. Johnston's novel, Exit Pursued by a Bear, we can see this idea of the docile and dangerous female body still being perpetuated over 40 years later. So, Exit Pursued by a Bear follows the story of Hermione Winters, a Canadian teenager who, whilst at a cheerleading camp, is drugged at a party and she ends up being raped. She can't remember her attacker's face, and when she discovers she's pregnant, she opts to have an abortion, and she is supported by her family and friends as she tries to seek after the things that she wanted to do with her life before the attack. Johnston's novel falls into the category of what Altros conceptualizes as the rape script. That is, the YA novel that focuses on the issue of rape and the aftermath. Rape fiction is generally employed by YA authors in order to curtail the developing sexuality of teens and offers insight into how these narratives are responsible for constructions of gendered subjectivity when representing rape. What is often problematic with rape novels for teen girls is that the blame for the crime can be inscribed on the female body. As Altrose writes, every female body is thus constructed as partly responsible for the rape, and responsibility for rape prevention is assigned to women and girls as owners of female bodies. Johnston's novel is similar in its attitude to the development of girls' sexuality, with the ideas presented over 40 years after Bloom's novel. That is, that sexuality can be dangerous and the female body docile, able to be constructed and in need of constraint. What is interesting in reading Johnston's novel is that we are immediately situated in Foucault's confessional, because the novel's prologue actually occurs inside a church and with Hermione visiting the priest, whom she asks, "Please don't ask people to pray for me." The preface concludes before she can go into her story, and the narrator takes us back to cheer camp and the site of the crime. So by situating Hermione in the confessional, the narrative is discursively framed in such a way with that sense of confession, and Foucault's ideas of sex being infused with sin and confession are brought to the forefront. The idea of the girl's body being both dangerous and docile is represented in the scene leading up to the rape. Prior to the party that the cheerleaders attend, Hermione and her friends spend a lot of time getting ready. Hermione seems to enjoy the company of her girlfriends more than her boyfriend Leo, and seems to be quite naive with regards to his desire for her. Later at the party, Hermione is persuaded by her friend Polly to join in unconstrained dancing, and it's moments later that she's offered a drugged beverage and she's pulled away from the party and raped. By framing the attack within this context, there's almost a sense of Hermione being punished for flaunting her dangerous body. Furthermore, she's shown as doubly dangerous for being both dangerous, being sexually alluring at the party, and also being very naive about her sexuality. As Tolman writes, this corresponds with Tolman's notions of institutionalized voices assuming girls are uneducated about their bodies and sexuality. And she writes, "In some studies, girls are represented as and assumed to be sexual objects of boys' desire, incorporating an absence of girls' sexual desire into the very design. The obscuring of the adolescent girls' bodies by theory and research suggests the power and the need in this culture to override girls' sexuality." The notion of the dangerous body is highlighted further through images of death in the novel. Towards the beginning of the narrative, Hermione foreshadows the trauma she's going to experience by recounting at the camp the story of Clara, a girl from her school whom she's been a friend to, who was killed by a drunk driver. Hermione tells the other members of the camp, "That's our curse. Every single graduating class is one person short." The fact that she claims this curse over the class and over herself not only foreshadows the experience of trauma she's going to have, but also asserts the notion that Hermione is a docile body. She can't stop what's about to happen to her. And this image of danger, the dangerous body, and death is also linked later in the narrative when Hermione dresses up as a zombie for Halloween, connecting this image of herself being like her dead friend and connecting that image of the dangerous female body with the fictional dangerous zombie body. The assigning of blame for the rape is highly problematic in Johnston's novel, as the attacker is unnamed for the entire narrative, and it's only in the last few pages that Hermione remembers who it is. As Altrose asserts, excluding the rapist or focusing on the female victim in rape prevention discourse functions to infuse female bodies with the potential of rape, which becomes a prior condition to be validated rather than created by the rapist. This places the responsibility for rape prevention on women and sanctions state and public control of female bodies as a means of rape prevention. Hermione becomes the focus of gossip and criticism at school by her peers, and she has to wait until 4 weeks after the rape before she can have an abortion. And she describes this period in her life as being in purgatory, waiting for my body to catch up with the rest of the world. Johnston illustrates the sense of alienation felt by the protagonist and signals the sense of punishment that she feels by including instances where she becomes the subject of gossip, and also through that term purgatory. Hermione does attempt to break out of her status as the vulnerable young female and to overcome her sense of victimization, though this only seems to be possible through the setting of the patriarchy. The 2 doctors she sees are male, and her psychiatrist is also male. The psychiatrist she sees seems to further the need for the institutionalized voices of the patriarchy to put constraints on female sexuality, and discourses of normality and abnormality are what frames Hermione's journey to recovery. The psychologist, Dr. Hurt, is also quite patronising of Hermione's interests. For example, before her cheer competition, right at the end of the novel, when she has identified the rapist, her psychiatrist tells her to simply adapt and go win that silly dance competition so I don't have to counsel you through a developing inferiority complex. And it's through these discourses that it seems to be the female character being of less importance and being talked down to like a child. Another male character who gives Hermione attention is her friend Dion, with whom Hermione can see herself developing a more serious attachment. And the feelings that she finds herself experiencing Dion are interestingly similar to the feelings that she experiences when she's drugged and about to be raped. She, for example, with Dion and prior to being raped, she describes herself as feeling weak and like she can't stop herself. She can't stop herself from kissing Dion later in the book, in the same way that she can't stop herself from going off with the unnamed rapist. Such descriptions emphasise the didacticism inherent in the text and are further proof of the notion that literary representations, to quote Day, of adolescent womanhood have long been fraught with warnings that seek to restrict young women's explorations of their own physical agency and desire. How then should writers write for girl readers? Well, from the discussion of the 2 novels, we can see that there's still that dominant ideology in YA literature that seeks to restrict exploration of young female desire. Now, I'm not suggesting through this lecture that teenage girls should be encouraged through YA literature to act without restraint, but I do believe that texts that promote this idea of female bodies being both docile and dangerous can be something that is detrimental, because if female sexuality is something to be feared, but then the protagonist explores that sexuality, it becomes something about that which that female protagonist becomes ashamed. If we negate this notion of girls' experiences of sexual desire, then the girl remains the object of the male gaze. She becomes all the more easily objectified, and she herself holds no sense of agency with regards to her sexuality. In line with Foucault's theories regarding institutional power over the body, she becomes docile. Furthermore, if the cultural assumptions that Tolman's research shows stance that girls don't experience sexual desire, then the female body becomes a dangerous thing rather than something that can be agentic. The girl's body is then something outside the girl's control, something that can lure the male gaze and ultimately just cause trouble for her. According to Tolman, it is imperative that when engaging girls in discourses regarding sexuality, that we go beyond those usual topics. So going beyond topics such as contraception, frequency of sex, STIs, date rape. To promote a healthy view of sexuality, it is important to balance discourses about sex and sexuality and gender between the dangers as well as the pleasures. As when girls are merely the receivers of ideas surrounding the dangers, it can lead to their own experiences with developing sexuality, producing shame. However, as Tolman also asserts, if girls don't know the dangers or consequences, they will not feel compelled to act responsibly about their own sexuality. I hope that through this lecture you will consider your own responses when reading fiction that is directed towards young female readers, particularly those novels which involve discourses regarding sex and sexuality. I also hope that you will consider your own female audiences if you write YA for young females, and consider in what way do you hope to shape young people's ideas about female sexuality. It's by reshaping discourses we can hopefully, going back to Foucault's theories, reframe young girls' sexuality in a more positive light.